Please, Jennifer. We're family. You can't just watch us lose everything. Those words should have meant something to me once. But standing in the marble foyer of what used to be my home, the same foyer where they'd thrown my belongings into garbage bags while my 2-year-old son cried in my arms, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. You know what they say about karma. Sometimes it takes years to come full circle, but when it does, it's absolutely devastating. Sometimes the people who destroy you end up kneeling at your feet, begging for the mercy they never showed you. Hey everyone, hope you're having a great day wherever you're watching from. The weather's been unpredictable lately, hasn't it? Just like life, I suppose. Speaking of unpredictable turns, that's exactly what this story is about. My name is Jennifer Coaster, and this is the story of how I went from being a broken widow thrown out like trash to becoming the woman who owns everything my former in-laws once thought was theirs forever. Picture this. The same people who called me a gold-digging nobody now sit in my boardroom, signing papers that transfer their last remaining assets to me. The irony is almost too perfect. But before we get to that beautiful moment of justice, let me ask you something. Have you ever been so completely betrayed by people you trusted that it changed the very core of who you are? If you have, you'll understand this story. If you haven't, well, consider yourself lucky. And if you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe because trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. But let me start from the beginning. Back when I was 25 and still believed that love and family meant something. I was young then, maybe too young to understand how cruel people could be when money was involved. I believed in fairness. I believed that when you married someone, their family became your family. I believed that love conquered all the petty differences that seemed to matter so much to everyone else. God, I was naive. When I married David Coaster 3 years earlier, I thought I was marrying into a family. The Coasters owned half the commercial real estate in the city, had their name on hospital wings and university buildings. Old money, the kind that came with expectations and traditions I was still learning to navigate. David was different from his family, though. Where they were cold and calculating, he was warm. Where they saw dollar signs, he saw people. He'd inherited his grandfather's gentle heart along with his trust fund, and somehow, miraculously, he'd fallen in love with me, a girl from the South Side whose biggest asset was her nursing degree and her grandmother's old recipes. The Coasters tolerated me because David loved me. That's what I told myself anyway. Margaret Coaster, David's mother, would smile that tight smile whenever I spoke at family dinners. Richard, his father, would nod politely when I shared stories about my work at the Children's Hospital. David's sister Patricia would include me in conversations about charity galas and country club events, though I always felt like I was speaking a foreign language. But David made it all worth it. He'd squeeze my hand under the dinner table when his mother made one of her subtle comments about different backgrounds. He'd whisper jokes in my ear during those endless charity functions where everyone seemed to know exactly which fork to use and which wine paired with which course. "They'll come around," he'd tell me as we drove home from another awkward family gathering. "They just need time to see what I see in you." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. When our son James was born, I thought everything would change. How could they not love this perfect little boy with David's eyes and my stubborn chin? For a while, it seemed like David was right. Margaret would coo over James during visits, and Richard would talk about teaching him to sail when he got older. But I should have paid attention to the way they looked at me when they thought I wasn't watching. I should have noticed how they always referred to James as David's son instead of our grandson. I should have seen the way they exchanged glances when David talked about updating his will after James was born. I should have realized that to them, I was never family. I was just an obstacle between them and what they considered rightfully theirs. The accident happened on a Tuesday. David was driving home from a client meeting when a drunk driver ran a red light. The doctors said he died instantly, that he didn't suffer. I suppose that was meant to be a comfort, but all I could think about was how he'd kissed me goodbye that morning and promised to pick up dinner on his way home. One moment, I was a wife and mother planning a quiet evening with my family. The next, I was a 25-year-old widow with a 2-year-old son and no idea how dramatically my world was about to change. The funeral was a blur of black dresses and whispered condolences. The Coasters handled all the arrangements, which I was grateful for at the time. I could barely function, let alone plan a service for hundreds of people. I sat in the front pew holding James, who kept asking when Daddy was coming home, while David's family accepted sympathy from business associates and social connections I'd never even met. "She's holding up remarkably well," I heard someone whisper behind me. "Poor thing. So young to be left alone. At least the family will take care of her." If only they knew what was coming. The reading of the will happened a week later in the law offices of Hartwell and Associates, the firm that had handled Coaster family business for 3 generations. I sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than my car, James on my lap playing with a toy truck, while the lawyer droned through legal language I barely understood. David had left me everything. The house, his shares in the family business, his personal accounts, his life insurance. Everything except a few sentimental items that went to his parents and sister. I remember feeling overwhelmed by his generosity, by the security he tried to provide for James and me even in death. I should have known it was too good to be true. "Of course, there are some complications," the lawyer continued, and I felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "The house, while left to Jennifer, is actually held in a family trust with certain stipulations." Margaret leaned forward in her chair. "What kind of stipulations?" "The property can only be inherited by a blood member of the Coaster family. Since Jennifer isn't technically a Coaster by blood, and the marriage has been dissolved by death, the house reverts to the family trust." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean exactly?" Richard cleared his throat. "It means the house stays in the family, dear. Don't worry, we'll make sure you and James are taken care of." The lawyer continued reading, and with each paragraph, I watched my security disappear. The business shares? They had a similar clause. The life insurance? Apparently, there was some technicality about beneficiaries that I didn't understand, but that seemed to favor the family trust over David's widow. By the time the meeting was over, I was left with David's personal checking account, about $15,000, and the promise that the Coasters would work something out for James and me. I should have fought it then. I should have hired my own lawyer, demanded explanations, refused to sign the papers they kept sliding across the table. But I was grieving, exhausted, and completely out of my depth. These people had been practicing family law and business manipulation since before I was born. And I trusted them. God help me, I actually trusted them to do right by David's son. "Don't worry about any of this legal nonsense," Margaret said as we left the lawyer's office. "You and James will always have a home with us. David would have wanted that." Patricia nodded sympathetically. "We're family, Jennifer. We take care of our own." For exactly 2 weeks, they kept that promise. I stayed in the guest wing of the main Coaster estate while they sorted out the paperwork on the house David and I had shared. James played in the same gardens where David had grown up, and I tried to figure out how to build a life as a single mother. Then everything changed. I came back from a job interview one afternoon to find my belongings packed in garbage bags by the front door. Not packed carefully, thrown together like trash, my clothes wrinkled, James's toys scattered and broken. Margaret stood in the foyer with her arms crossed, looking like she'd just taken out the garbage. "I'm sorry, Jennifer, but this arrangement isn't working out." I stared at the bags, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. "I don't understand." "You said." "I said we'd work something out, and we have. There's a small apartment available above the garage. You and James can stay there temporarily while you get back on your feet." The apartment above the garage was where they'd housed the groundskeeper before they'd upgraded to a landscaping service. It was one room with a hot plate and a bathroom that hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The ceiling leaked when it rained, and the heating barely worked. This is temporary, I told myself as I unpacked our belongings in that tiny space. Just until I can save enough for a real place. But temporary became permanent when I realized how thoroughly they'd destroyed my financial foundation. Every job interview I went on somehow ended with the employer deciding I wasn't quite the right fit. Every apartment application I submitted was mysteriously rejected. Every reference I listed seemed to have concerns about my reliability or character. It took me months to realize they were sabotaging me. The coaster name carried weight in this city, and they were using that weight to keep me trapped and dependent. The final betrayal came 6 months after David's death. I was working a night shift at a hospital across town, the only job I could get that was far enough away from coaster influence, when I came home to find the apartment empty. Not just empty. Cleaned out. Every piece of furniture, every toy, every photograph. Even James's crib was gone. I ran to the main house, my heart pounding, and found Margaret in the sitting room having tea like nothing had happened. "Where's my son?" She looked up calmly. "James is upstairs sleeping. We've decided it's time for a more permanent arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Richard appeared in the doorway, and I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "Jennifer, you're clearly struggling to provide a stable environment for James. We think it's best if he stays here with us while you figure things out." "You can't take my son." "We're not taking him," Patricia said, joining her parents. "We're providing him with the stability and opportunities he deserves. The kind of life David would have wanted for him." I looked around the room at these 3 people who had systematically destroyed everything David had tried to leave me, and I finally understood. This had never been about what was best for James or honoring David's memory. This was about erasing me completely. They wanted David's son, but they didn't want David's wife. They wanted the coaster heir, but they didn't want the reminder that he was half mine. "I'll fight you," I said, my voice shaking with rage and desperation. "I'll take you to court." "I'll." "With what money?" Margaret's voice was ice cold. "With what lawyer?" "Jennifer, be realistic. You're a single mother with no resources, no family support, and no stable income. We're offering James the best education, the best opportunities, the best life. What judge wouldn't see that we're acting in his best interests?" They were right, and we all knew it. I had $15,000 to my name, no family who could help, and they had unlimited resources and 3 generations of legal connections. But I had one thing they didn't know about. One secret that my grandmother had made me promise to keep until the time was right. "Fine," I said, my voice steady now. "You want to play this game? You want to take everything David left for his family? Go ahead. But don't think for 1 second that this is over." Margaret laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Jennifer. What exactly do you think you're going to do? You're nobody. You have nothing. You are nothing." I looked at my son's toys scattered around their perfect sitting room, at the family photos where my face had already been turned down, at these people who had taken everything I loved and thought they'd won. "We'll see about that," I said. And then I walked away. From the house, from the city, from everything I'd ever known. I left my son with people who hated me because I knew that fighting them then would only hurt him more. But I made myself a promise that night as I drove away with nothing but a suitcase and my grandmother's old jewelry box. I would be back. And when I returned, I would be someone they couldn't dismiss, couldn't manipulate, couldn't destroy. I would be someone who could take everything they'd stolen and make them beg for mercy. I just had to wait 4 more years for my 30th birthday. Because that's when my grandmother's $200 million inheritance would finally be mine. The thing about losing everything is that it strips away all the illusions you've been carrying about who you are and what you're capable of. When I drove away from the Coaster estate that night, I wasn't the same naive girl who'd married David 3 years earlier. I was someone harder, someone who understood that survival meant playing by different rules. I ended up in Portland, Oregon, about as far from the Coaster's influence as I could get while staying in the continental United States. I chose Portland because it was big enough for me to disappear in, but small enough that I could build something real. And because my grandmother had always talked about the Pacific Northwest like it was some kind of promised land. My grandmother, Rosa Martinez, had been the strongest woman I'd ever known. She'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8, working 3 jobs to keep us afloat while somehow still finding time to teach me about dignity, resilience, and the power of patience. She died when I was 22, just a year before I met David, and I'd thought her greatest gift to me was the love and strength she'd instilled. I had no idea about the money. The inheritance had been a complete shock, revealed only in a letter she'd left with her lawyer to be given to me on my 20th birthday. By then, I was already married to David and living in what I thought was security, so the news that I would inherit $200 million on my 30th birthday felt almost abstract. The money was tied up in investments and trusts that I couldn't touch, managed by a firm in New York that sent me quarterly statements I barely understood. David had known about it, of course. I'd told him everything because that's what you do when you love someone completely. He'd been amazed, but not greedy, more excited about what we could do for others than what we could buy for ourselves. We could start a foundation, he'd said, holding the lawyer's letter with reverent hands. Help kids like you who lose their parents. Make sure they get the same chances you did. That was David, always thinking about how to lift others up. I never told his family about the inheritance. Something about the way they looked at me, the way they calculated my worth based on my background and my job, made me want to keep that information private. David agreed. We decided we'd tell them eventually, maybe when the money actually became available, but there was no rush. Thank God we kept that secret. Now, sitting in a studio apartment in Portland that cost $800 a month and had a view of a brick wall, I realized that inheritance was the only reason I could afford to disappear. The quarterly statements showed the investments growing steadily, and while I couldn't touch the principal, there was a small allowance available for educational and professional development purposes. It wasn't much, about $2,000 a month, but it was enough to keep me alive while I figured out how to become someone the coasters couldn't destroy. I enrolled in business school at Portland State University, using my nursing background to get into their healthcare management program. During the day, I studied finance, operations, and strategic planning. At night, I worked as a nurse at a children's hospital, partly for the income, but mostly because being around kids helped fill the hole that missing James had torn in my chest. Every night, I called the Coaster house to talk to my son. For the first few months, they actually let me speak to him, though always with someone listening in. "Mama?" James's little voice would come through the phone, and my heart would break all over again. "Hi, baby. How was your day?" "I played with trucks. Grandma Margaret says you're working far away, but you love me very much." "That's right, sweetheart. Mama loves you more than all the stars in the sky. When are you coming home?" That question destroyed me every single time. "Soon, baby. Mama's working very hard so she can come home soon." But as the months passed, the calls became shorter and less frequent. James started calling Margaret Grandma instead of Mrs. Margaret. He stopped asking when I was coming home. By the time he turned 3, he barely seemed to remember who I was. That's when I realized the coasters weren't just keeping him from me, they were erasing me from his memory entirely. The last time I spoke to James was on his 3rd birthday. I'd sent a package with books and a stuffed elephant that played his favorite lullaby, but when I called, Margaret answered with ice in her voice. "Jennifer, I think it's time we discussed what's best for James going forward. I want to talk to my son." That's exactly what I mean. These calls are confusing for him. He's settled in beautifully here, he's thriving, and these constant reminders of the past are disruptive to his development. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. He's my son. Legally, that's becoming questionable. We've been his primary caregivers for over a year now. We're providing his housing, his education, his healthcare, his stability. A court might very well see us as his de facto guardians. The threat was clear. Stop calling or they'd make their custody official. Let me talk to him. One last time. There was a long pause, then James's voice, smaller and more distant than before. Hello. Hi, baby. It's Mama. Happy birthday. Thank you. Grandma Margaret made me a big cake with trucks on it. That sounds wonderful. Did you get the elephant I sent you? Yes. But Grandpa Richard says I'm too old for stuffed animals now. He gave it to charity. They'd thrown away my gift. Of course they had. James, I want you to know that Mama loves you very much, okay? Even when we can't talk, even when I'm far away, I love you more than anything in the whole world. Okay, can I go play now? Tommy's here for my party. Of course, sweetheart. Have fun. Bye. And that was it. The last conversation I had with my son for 4 years. After that, my calls went straight to voicemail. My letters were returned unopened. The packages I sent disappeared into the void of the Coaster estate, and I had no way of knowing if James ever saw them. But I kept sending them anyway. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone I could think of. I documented everything in a journal, what I sent, when I sent it, how they responded or didn't respond. I was building a record, evidence that I'd never stopped trying to be his mother even when they made it impossible. Meanwhile, I threw myself into becoming someone they couldn't dismiss. Business school was just the beginning. I used every resource available to me, every connection I could make, every opportunity that presented itself. I studied the Coaster family business model, learned everything I could about real estate development and investment management. I analyzed their holdings, their strategies, their weaknesses. I also studied them personally. I subscribed to the society pages of their hometown newspaper, followed their social media accounts from fake profiles, tracked their business moves through public records. I watched Margaret's charity work, Richard's golf tournaments, Patricia's art gallery openings. I memorized their patterns, their preferences, their pressure points. Knowledge was power, and I was going to need all the power I could get. By my second year in Portland, I'd caught the attention of Dr. Sandra Luke, a professor who'd built and sold 3 healthcare companies before returning to academia. She saw something in me that reminded her of herself, a hunger that went beyond grades or degrees. You're not here just to learn, she said after I'd presented a business plan for a pediatric care management company. You're here to build something. What's driving you? I told her about James, about losing him, about needing to become someone who could provide the kind of life he deserved. I didn't mention the inheritance or the coasters specifically, but I told her enough that she understood the stakes. Then let's make sure you're ready, she said. Dr. Luke became my mentor, my guide into a world I'd never imagined I could access. She introduced me to venture capitalists, successful entrepreneurs, women who'd built empires from nothing. She taught me how to present myself, how to negotiate, how to think strategically about long-term goals. More importantly, she taught me how to be patient. Revenge is a dish best served cold, she said one evening as we worked late in her office. But transformation? That's a dish that takes years to prepare properly. Don't rush the process. When you're ready to move, you want to be absolutely unstoppable. I took her advice to heart. I spent my 3rd year in Portland working for a healthcare consulting firm, learning how businesses really operated from the inside. I saw how deals were made, how companies were acquired, how power actually flowed in the corporate world. I also started dating again, though nothing serious. I wasn't ready for serious. But I learned how to move in social circles I'd never accessed before, how to network, how to present myself as someone worth knowing rather than someone worth pitying. The biggest change came in my 4th year, when Dr. Luke introduced me to James Webb, not my son, but a venture capitalist who specialized in healthcare investments. James Webb was everything the coasters thought they were: old money, Ivy League education, connections that spanned industries and continents. But unlike the coasters, James Webb had earned his reputation through merit rather than inheritance. He'd built his first company at 25, sold it at 30, and spent the next decade investing in other people's dreams while building his own empire. He was also kind, funny, and completely unimpressed by the kind of social posturing that the Coasters lived for. "I hear you're planning something big," he said over coffee after Dr. Luke had introduced us at a healthcare innovation conference. "What makes you say that?" "The way you ask questions. You're not just learning about healthcare management or business strategy. You're learning about power, about how to acquire it, how to use it, how to make it last." I studied his face, trying to decide how much to trust him. "And if I were? Then I'd want to help. I've been looking for someone with your combination of intelligence, drive, and—" He paused, searching for the right word, righteous anger. "Those are the people who change industries." James Webb became my business partner, my mentor in ways that went far beyond what Dr. Luke could teach me, and eventually, something more. Not love, I wasn't ready for love yet, but partnership. Respect. A relationship built on shared goals and mutual admiration rather than the desperate need that had characterized my marriage to David. Together, we started planning for my 30th birthday, still 2 years away. We researched investment opportunities, identified target markets, developed strategies for rapid expansion. We also researched the Coaster family business, though I was careful not to reveal the personal connection. "Interesting choice," James said when I brought up Coaster development as a potential acquisition target. "They're overextended, overleveraged, and completely dependent on a real estate market that's showing signs of instability." "Why are you interested in them specifically?" "They have assets I want," I said, which was true enough. "Fair enough. But if we're going to move against them, we need to be smart about it. They've been playing this game for 3 generations. They won't go down easy." "I'm counting on it," I said. Because the truth was, I didn't want them to go down easy. I wanted them to see it coming. I wanted them to understand exactly who was destroying them and why. I wanted them to remember every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every moment they'd made me feel like nothing. I wanted them to know that the woman they'd thrown away had become their worst nightmare. As my 30th birthday approached, I started making more concrete plans. I would return to their city not as the broken widow they'd discarded, but as someone they couldn't ignore. I would buy back everything they'd stolen from me, piece by piece, until they understood the magnitude of their mistake. But first, I had to see my son. James would be 7 now, old enough to remember me if I could just get close enough to remind him. I hired a private investigator to get current photos, to learn about his school, his interests, his daily routine. What I learned broke my heart and strengthened my resolve in equal measure. He was a beautiful child, tall for his age with David's gentle eyes and my stubborn chin. He played soccer, loved dinosaurs, and was reading at a level far above his grade. The Coasters had given him every material advantage, just as they'd promised. But in every photo, he looked serious, almost sad. There was something missing in his expression, something that reminded me of David when he was trying to please his family instead of being himself. They were turning my joyful, curious little boy into a miniature version of themselves. Polite, controlled, emotionally distant. That's when I knew I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was fighting for my son's soul. The money became available on my 30th birthday, exactly as my grandmother's will had specified. $200 million, grown to nearly $250 million through careful investment over the years. Enough to buy and sell the Coaster family several times over. James Webb and I had already established our investment firm, Meridian Capital, with offices in Portland, Seattle, and New York. We'd built a reputation for strategic acquisitions in the healthcare and real estate sectors. We were known for being thorough, aggressive, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting our investments. The Coasters had no idea what was coming. I spent 6 months after my birthday making strategic moves, acquiring companies and properties that would give me leverage in their market. I bought their biggest competitor. I purchased the bank that held most of their development loans. I acquired the construction company they used for their high-end projects. I was building a web around them, and they were so focused on their own small world that they never noticed the spider moving into position. The first direct move came when I bought the building that housed their corporate offices. They'd been renting the space for 15 years, comfortable in the assumption that their landlord would never sell to someone who might disrupt their operations. They were wrong. I gave them 60 days' notice that their lease would not be renewed. The rent on comparable space in the area had tripled in the past year, partly due to my own strategic acquisitions, and they couldn't afford to relocate without taking a significant financial hit. That's when Richard Koester called me for the first time in 5 years. Jennifer, this is Richard Koester. I think there's been some kind of mistake. I was sitting in my corner office in Portland, looking out at the mountains while I destroyed his family's financial foundation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Hello, Richard. No mistake. Meridian Capital purchased your building 6 months ago. We're simply choosing not to renew your lease. But why? We've been excellent tenants. We've never missed a payment. I'm sure you have been. But we have other plans for the space. There was a long pause. I could practically hear him trying to figure out how Jennifer the nobody had become Jennifer the landlord. Perhaps we could discuss this in person? I'm sure we can work something out. I don't think so, Richard. You have 58 days to vacate. I suggest you start looking for alternative arrangements. Jennifer, please. Be reasonable. We're family. And there it was. The word they'd never used when it mattered, deployed now that they needed something from me. Family? I let the word hang in the air for a moment. That's interesting. I seem to remember family meaning something very different the last time we spoke. That was a difficult time for everyone. We were all grieving, making decisions under stress. Perhaps we could. 58 days, Richard. I hung up. That night, I called James Webb to update him on our progress. They're starting to panic, I told him. Richard called personally to try to negotiate. Good. Panic makes people sloppy. What's the next move? The construction company. They have 3 major projects that depend on Hartwell construction. If we suddenly become unavailable, their projects stall, they miss deadlines, they pay penalties. James's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who appreciated elegant strategy. I love it. But Jennifer. Yeah, make sure you're ready for them to fight back. They're not going to just roll over and let you destroy them. They'll try to figure out who you really are, what you want, how to stop you. Let them try, I said. I've been preparing for this fight for 5 years. They've been coasting on inherited privilege for 3 generations. We'll see who's really stronger. But even as I said it, I knew James was right. The Koesters weren't going to go quietly. And when they started digging into my background, when they realized that the woman destroying them was the same woman they'd thrown away, the real war would begin. I was ready for that war. I'd been ready for years. What I wasn't ready for was seeing my son again and discovering that he didn't remember me at all. The moment I realized the Koesters had figured out who I was came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, when my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. We know it's you. Margaret's voice cut through the darkness of my Portland apartment like a blade. I'd been expecting this call for weeks, ever since Richard had started asking questions about Meridian Capital's ownership structure. Hello, Margaret. It's been a long time. Not long enough, apparently. Did you really think we wouldn't figure it out? Jennifer Martinez, hiding behind some investment firm, playing games with our business. I sat up in bed, fully awake now. I'm not hiding behind anything. Meridian Capital is a legitimate investment firm with a diverse portfolio. Your properties just happen to be part of our strategic acquisitions. Cut the corporate speak, Jennifer. We know what this is about. You're angry about the past, and you think you can use some mysterious money to hurt us. But you're forgetting something important. What's that? We have James. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known this moment would come, known they'd eventually use my son as leverage, but hearing it stated so baldly still took my breath away. James is our grandson, Margaret continued, her voice sickeningly sweet now. He's been with us for 5 years. He calls us Grandma and Grandpa. He doesn't even remember you, Jennifer. To him, you're just some woman who used to know his father. I gripped the phone tighter, forcing my voice to stay steady. He's my son. Legally, that's debatable. We've been his guardians for years. We've provided his home, his education, his stability. Any court would see that removing him from the only family he's known would be traumatic and harmful. What do you want, Margaret? I want you to stop this ridiculous vendetta and disappear again. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of and leave us alone. In exchange, we'll continue to provide James with the life he deserves. And if I don't? Then we'll make sure you never see him again. We'll move him somewhere you can't find him. We'll change his name if we have to. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering where your son is and whether he's safe. The threat was clear, and we both knew they had the power to carry it out. They had resources, connections, and 5 years of established custody. I had money, but money couldn't buy back lost time or erased memories. You have 24 hours to decide, Margaret said. Stop the attacks on our business or lose your son forever. She hung up, leaving me alone in the dark with the weight of an impossible choice. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, I sat by my window watching the city wake up while I tried to figure out how to save my son without destroying everything I'd built. By morning, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I was going home. Not to surrender, never that, but to see James for myself. To understand what 5 years with the Coasters had done to him. To figure out if the little boy I'd left behind was still somewhere inside the child they'd molded. I flew back to the city that afternoon, my first time returning since I'd driven away with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. The skyline looked different, more developed, with new buildings that probably bore the Coaster name somewhere in their foundations. I checked into a hotel downtown under my maiden name and spent the evening driving past places that had once been familiar. The house David and I had shared was still there, but it looked different somehow. Smaller. The garden we'd planned together had been replaced with something more formal, more expensive, less personal. The Coaster estate looked exactly the same, imposing and perfect behind its iron gates. I parked across the street and waited, hoping to catch a glimpse of James coming home from school. At 3:30, a black SUV pulled through the gates. I couldn't see inside through the tinted windows, but my heart started racing anyway. Was he in there? Was my son just 50 feet away from me, close enough to touch if not for the walls they'd built between us? I waited until dark, but I never saw him. The next morning, I did something that probably wasn't smart, but felt absolutely necessary. I went to his school. Riverside Academy was exactly the kind of place the Coasters would choose, exclusive, expensive, with a waiting list longer than most college applications. I sat in my rental car across from the main entrance, watching children arrive with their nannies and drivers, looking for a face I might recognize. And then I saw him. James climbed out of the same black SUV I'd seen the day before, and my breath caught in my throat. He was beautiful, tall for 7 with David's gentle features and my dark hair. He wore the school uniform perfectly, his backpack slung over one shoulder, walking with the kind of confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. But there was something else in his posture, something that made my heart ache. He looked careful, controlled, like a child who'd learned that spontaneity wasn't welcome. Even from a distance, I could see that the joyful, curious little boy I'd known had been replaced by someone more serious, more guarded. He looked like a miniature Coaster. I watched him disappear into the school building and made another decision that would have consequences I couldn't foresee. I was going to talk to him. Not kidnap him, not cause a scene, just talk to him. I needed to know if any part of him remembered me, if there was any chance of rebuilding what we'd lost. I waited until school let out, positioning myself near the playground where parents and caregivers gathered to pick up their children. I wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, trying to blend in with the other adults while scanning the crowd for James. When I saw him, he was walking alone toward the pickup area, his face serious as he checked something in his backpack. This was my chance. James. He looked up at the sound of his name, and for a moment, our eyes met. I saw David in his features, saw myself in the stubborn set of his jaw, but I also saw something that broke my heart, complete lack of recognition. "Do I know you?" he asked politely, the way he'd been taught to respond to strangers. I struggled to find words that wouldn't frighten him or cause problems I wasn't ready to handle. "I knew your father. A long time ago." His face brightened slightly. "You knew my dad? He died when I was little." "Yes, I know. I'm very sorry about that. He was a wonderful man. Grandma Margaret says he was the best person she ever knew. She has lots of pictures of him in our house." "That's nice. Do you remember much about when you were little?" James shrugged. "Not really. Grandma says I was too young. But she tells me stories about my dad all the time." "What about your mother? Does she tell you stories about her too?" Something shifted in his expression, a shadow crossing his face. "I don't really have a mother. I mean, I did, but she left when I was little. Grandma says she wasn't ready to be a mom." The words hit me like a physical blow. They'd erased me completely, rewritten our history to make me the villain who'd abandoned him rather than the mother who'd been forced away. "James, what if I told you?" "James." "There you are." I turned to see Patricia Coaster approaching, her face a mask of polite concern that didn't quite hide the fury in her eyes. She'd spotted me talking to him and was moving quickly to intervene. "Aunt Patricia." James ran to her, and she wrapped him in a protective hug while staring at me over his head. "Who's your new friend, sweetheart?" "She knew Daddy," James said innocently. "She was telling me about him." "How nice," Patricia said, her voice dripping with fall sweetness. "But we need to get you home now. Grandma's making your favorite dinner." She guided James toward their car, but not before giving me a look that promised consequences. I watched them drive away, my son chattering excitedly about something while his aunt called someone on her phone, probably Margaret, probably to report that I'd made contact. I'd blown my cover, but I'd learned something crucial. James didn't remember me at all. In his mind, I was the mother who'd abandoned him, not the mother who'd been stolen from him. The Coasters had done their work well. That night, my hotel room phone rang. "You have some nerve." Richard's voice was cold with rage. "Approaching our grandson at his school like some kind of stalker." "I wanted to see my son." "He's not your son anymore, Jennifer. You gave up that right when you walked away 5 years ago." "I didn't walk away. You threw me out. We offered you a place in his life, and you chose to leave instead. That was your decision." The gaslighting was breathtaking in its audacity. They'd rewritten history so completely that they probably believed their own version of events. "I want to see him again," I said. "That's not going to happen. We've already spoken to our lawyers about getting a restraining order. If you come near James again, we'll have you arrested. You can't keep me from my own child. Watch us." "You're a stranger to him now, Jennifer. A stranger with a history of abandonment and instability. No court is going to give you access to a child you haven't seen in 5 years, especially when that child is thriving in a stable, loving home." "Loving?" I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. "You turned him into a little robot. He's 7 years old, and he talks like he's giving a presentation. We've given him structure, discipline, and opportunities you never could have provided. He's happy, healthy, and successful. That's what matters. What matters is that he's my son." "Not anymore," Richard said. "And if you continue this harassment, we'll make sure the whole world knows what kind of person you really are. A woman who abandoned her child and then came back years later to stalk him at school. How do you think that will look in the newspapers?" The threat was clear. They'd destroy my reputation, my business, everything I'd built if I didn't back down. "You have until tomorrow morning to leave town," Richard continued. "If you're still here after that, we'll take legal action." And Jennifer, if you ever come near our family again, you'll regret it. He hung up, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that I'd underestimated them. I'd thought money and strategy would be enough to win this war, but they had something I couldn't buy or plan around. They had my son's heart and mind. James didn't just not remember me. He'd been taught to see me as the villain in his story. But as I sat in that hotel room, staring out at the city lights and thinking about the little boy who'd called Patricia Aunt with such genuine affection, I realized something else. The Coasters had made a crucial mistake. They'd shown me exactly how much they feared losing him, which meant he was still mine to fight for. I wasn't leaving town. I wasn't backing down. I was going to war, and this time, I was going to win everything: my son, my dignity, and their complete destruction. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. I needed to know how deep their control went, how thoroughly they'd poisoned James against me, and what it would take to break through 5 years of careful manipulation. I needed to know my enemy better than they knew themselves. And I needed to accept that saving my son might require destroying the only family he'd ever known. The question was I strong enough to do what needed to be done, even if it meant hurting the child I was trying to save? Looking out at the city where I'd lost everything and everyone I'd ever loved, I realized there was only one answer. I had to be. The restraining order arrived at my hotel the next morning, delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Temporary order of protection, it read, prohibiting me from coming within 500 feet of James Coaster or his school, pending a full hearing in 2 weeks. James Coaster. Not James Martinez Coaster, not even James David Coaster. They'd erased my name from his identity as thoroughly as they'd erased me from his memory. I called James Webb from my hotel room, pacing between the window and the door while I explained the situation. "They're moving fast," he said after I'd filled him in. "That's actually good news." "How is a restraining order good news?" "Because it means they're scared. If they felt secure in their position, they'd ignore you. The fact that they're using legal weapons means they see you as a real threat." A threat to what? They have everything. My son doesn't even remember me. Jennifer, listen to me. You're thinking like a mother right now, and I understand that. But you need to think like a strategist. They just showed you their weakness. Which is, they're terrified of losing control of the narrative. Think about it. Why go to court to keep you away from James unless they're afraid of what might happen if you spend time with him? If he really didn't remember you, if he really saw you as a stranger, they'd let you visit and watch you fail. James was right, and I knew it. But knowing it didn't make the situation any less painful. So what do? I can't get near him, I can't talk to him, and they're probably already working on making their custody permanent. You do what you do best. You gather information, you build leverage, and you wait for them to make a mistake. And Jennifer? They will make a mistake. Desperate people always do. I spent the next week doing exactly that. I hired a team of private investigators to dig into every aspect of the Coaster family's life, business, and legal history. I wanted to know everything: their financial vulnerabilities, their personal secrets, their professional relationships. What I found was fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. The Coaster family business was in much worse shape than they'd let anyone know. Richard had made a series of bad investments over the past 3 years, betting heavily on commercial real estate just before the market started to shift. They were overleveraged, overextended, and desperately trying to maintain the appearance of success while quietly liquidating assets. More interesting was what I learned about their personal lives. Margaret had been seeing a therapist for anxiety and depression. Apparently, the stress of maintaining their social position was taking its toll. Patricia's art gallery was hemorrhaging money and only staying afloat through family subsidies. Richard had been borrowing against his life insurance to cover operating expenses. They were a family in crisis, held together by pride and the desperate need to maintain appearances. But the most revealing information came from James's school records, which my investigators obtained through channels I didn't ask about. His grades were excellent, his behavior reports were glowing, but there were notes from the school counselor that painted a different picture. James is a bright, well-behaved child who seems to carry a heavy emotional burden, one report read. He rarely speaks about his feelings and becomes visibly distressed when asked about his family history. Recommend continued monitoring for signs of anxiety or depression. Another note, from just 6 months earlier, James asked today if it was normal for children not to remember their mothers. When I asked him to elaborate, he said his grandmother told him his mother wasn't important enough to remember. This seems to be causing him some confusion and distress. They were damaging him. In their effort to erase me, they were creating wounds in my son that might never heal. That's when I decided to change tactics. Instead of trying to approach James directly, I started building relationships with people in his orbit. I volunteered at a children's charity that Patricia supported, making sure to be helpful and charming without revealing my identity. I attended fundraising events where the coasters were likely to appear, always staying in the background but observing their interactions. I learned that Margaret was struggling with the social pressures of maintaining their family's reputation. I watched her at a charity luncheon, saw how she forced smiles when people asked about the family business, how she deflected questions about their recent real estate sales. I saw Patricia arguing with her mother in the parking lot after an art gallery opening, their voices carrying just enough for me to catch fragments about unsustainable expenses and facing reality. Most importantly, I saw Richard at a business dinner, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He was trying to secure a loan from a potential investor, and I could see the desperation in his body language even from across the restaurant. They were cracking under pressure, and I hadn't even started applying real force yet. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after the restraining order, when my lead investigator called with information that changed everything. "You're going to want to sit down for this," he said. "What did you find? Remember how you said the coasters claimed your husband's will had all those family trust clauses? The ones that prevented you from inheriting." "Of course. That's how they took everything." "Well, I got a copy of the original will from the probate court. The real one, not the version they showed you." My heart started pounding. And, holding James in that dimly lit dormitory room, feeling his small body shake with confused tears, I realized that everything I'd planned, everything I'd worked for, came down to this moment. My son remembered me, but he was also terrified, caught between the family he'd known for 5 years and the mother who'd been erased from his life. "I'm scared," he whispered against my shoulder. "I know, baby. I'm scared too." Catherine was watching us from the doorway, her face torn between sympathy and fear. "What happens now?" she asked. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from my investigator. "FBI traced the money. They know about the school. You have maybe an hour before they arrive." I showed the message to Catherine, watched her face go pale. "We have to go," I said. "All of us." "Go where?" James asked, pulling back to look at me. "I don't want to leave Miss Catherine. She's been nice to me." "Miss Catherine is going to come with us, aren't you?" I looked at her meaningfully. "Because if she stays here when the FBI arrives, she's going to be arrested as an accessory to kidnapping." Catherine closed her eyes, understanding the impossible position she was in. "I never meant for any of this to happen. Richard said it was temporary, just until some legal issues were resolved. Richard lied to you, just like he lied to everyone else. But Catherine, you can still do the right thing. You can help me save James from people who've been using him as a weapon. If I help you, I'll be a fugitive too. If you don't help me, you'll be in federal prison. At least this way, you have a chance to make things right." James was looking back and forth between us, trying to understand why the adults in his life kept making decisions that scared him. "I want to call Grandma Margaret," he said. "I want to ask her why she lied about my mother." "We can't call her right now, sweetheart. But I promise you'll get to ask her that question soon." Are we in trouble? I knelt down to his level, taking his hands in mine. James, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt children. When that happens, other grown-ups have to make very hard choices to protect those children. That's what's happening now. Did Grandma and Grandpa make mistakes? Yes, baby. They made very big mistakes, and now we have to fix them. Catherine was packing James's belongings into a small suitcase, her movements quick and nervous. Where are we going to go? Every police officer in the country is looking for you. I have a place. Somewhere safe where we can figure out our next move. It wasn't entirely true. I had some ideas, some resources, but nothing that could be called a plan. I was making this up as I went along, driven by desperation and the fierce need to protect my son. We left Hillcrest Academy in Catherine's car, driving through the Vermont mountains in the pre-dawn darkness. James fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the emotional upheaval of the night. Catherine and I drove in tense silence, both of us understanding that we'd crossed a line there was no coming back from. Tell me about Richard, I said finally. How long were you involved with him? Catherine's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 2 years. It started when I was James's nanny. Richard was charming, attentive. He made me feel special. And Margaret knew? She found out 6 months ago. Walked in on us in Richard's study. The look on her face. Catherine shuddered. I'd never seen anyone that angry. Is that why you left? They paid me to leave. A lot of money, enough to buy the school and start over. Richard said it was better for everyone if I disappeared quietly. But you kept in touch. He called sometimes. Said he missed me, that he was thinking about leaving Margaret. I should have known it was all lies. I thought about the Coasters' marriage, about the careful facade they'd maintained for decades. They've been living separate lives for years. Richard's affairs, Margaret's pills, Patricia's financial problems. They're held together by nothing but pride and the need to maintain appearances. And James, Catherine added quietly. They're held together by James. She was right. My son had become the glue that kept their fractured family from completely falling apart. He was their second chance at raising David, their proof that the Coaster legacy would continue. Which made what I was doing even more dangerous. I wasn't just taking their grandson, I was taking their reason for existing. We drove for 3 hours before stopping at a small motel outside Burlington. I paid cash for 2 rooms, registered under fake names, and tried to figure out what to do next. James woke up confused and frightened, asking for his grandparents and wanting to know why we were in a strange place. I spent an hour trying to explain the situation in terms a 7-year-old could understand, watching his world reshape itself around truths he'd never been allowed to know. So Grandma Margaret and Grandpa Richard aren't bad people, but they did bad things, he asked. That's right, sweetheart. Sometimes people we love make choices that hurt us, even when they think they're protecting us. And you're really my mother? Not just someone who knew my dad. I'm really your mother. I carried you in my belly for 9 months. I was there when you were born. I took care of you every day until you were 2 years old. Why don't I remember more? Because you were very young, and because some people worked very hard to make you forget. James was quiet for a long time, processing information that would have been overwhelming for an adult. Finally, he looked up at me with David's serious eyes. What happens now? It was the question I'd been dreading because I didn't have a good answer. We were fugitives, all 3 of us. The FBI was looking. The aftermath of the press conference was swift and devastating for the Coasters. Within hours, the FBI had opened a formal investigation into the estate fraud. Within days, 3 other families had come forward with similar stories of manipulation and theft. Within a week, Richard Coaster was under federal indictment. But the real revelation came when the forensic accountants started digging into the Coaster family finances. What they found was a house of cards that had been collapsing for years. I was sitting in my lawyer's office 2 weeks after the press conference, James coloring quietly in the corner while we reviewed the investigation findings, when the full scope of the Coasters' desperation became clear. They weren't just stealing from you, my attorney explained, spreading financial documents across his desk. They've been running a systematic fraud operation for over a decade. Estate manipulation, trust fund theft, insurance fraud, they've stolen millions from dozens of families. How is that possible? James Hartwell, the lawyer who handled your husband's will, was their inside man. He'd identify wealthy clients with complex family situations, then help the Coasters manipulate estate documents to redirect inheritances into their control. I thought about all the families who'd trusted the Coasters, all the people who'd been told their loved ones had left them nothing while their inheritances disappeared into Coaster bank accounts. Your case was just the most personal, the lawyer continued. Because you were family, they could maintain long-term control over both the money and the child. What about James's custody? Is it settled? The family court judge reviewed all the evidence yesterday. Given the fraud, the manipulation, and James's own stated preference, you've been awarded full custody. The Coasters have supervised visitation rights, assuming they're not in federal prison. I looked over at my son, who was drawing a picture of what looked like our new apartment. He'd been living with me for 2 weeks now, and every day I watched him become more like the joyful, curious child I remembered. How is he handling all this? The lawyer asked. Better than I expected. He's angry about the lies, confused about why people he loved would hurt him, but he's resilient. He's been asking a lot of questions about his father, about our life before the Coasters took him. And the Coasters? How are they handling the custody decision? I thought about the last conversation I'd had with Margaret, 3 days earlier. She'd called to beg for more visitation time, her voice broken and desperate. They're destroyed, I said. Margaret's been hospitalized for a nervous breakdown. Patricia's moved back in with them to help manage the legal situation. Richard's trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutors aren't interested in anything less than full restitution and significant prison time. Do you feel sorry for them? It was a question I'd been asking myself every day. These people had stolen 5 years of my son's childhood, had traumatized him with lies, had nearly destroyed both our lives. But they were also broken people who'd lost their son and made terrible choices in their grief. I feel sorry for the people they could have been, I said finally. If they'd chosen love over control, if they'd honored David's memory instead of trying to rewrite it, we could have been a family. James could have had grandparents who loved him without trying to own him. And now? Now they're strangers who happen to share his DNA. James sees them once a week for 2 hours, and every visit ends with him asking why they lied to him. They created this situation, and now they have to live with the consequences. The lawyer gathered up the documents. There's one more thing. The restitution hearing is next week. Based on the forensic accounting, you're entitled to approximately $12 million in damages, your original inheritance plus interest, penalties, and compensation for emotional distress. $12 million. Added to my grandmother's inheritance, it would make me one of the wealthiest women in the city. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Coasters had spent 5 years trying to keep me from accessing money I already had, only to end up owing me even more. What will you do with it? I looked at James again, thought about the foundation David and I had dreamed of starting, the children's hospital where I'd worked during my darkest days in Portland. I'm going to do what David and I always planned. Start a foundation for children who've lost their parents. Make sure they get the support and advocacy they need to avoid situations like ours. That's fitting. It's what David would have wanted. And it's what James deserves, to see his father's memory honored in a way that helps other children. That evening, I was making dinner in our new apartment when James looked up from his homework with a question that stopped me cold. Mom, do you think Grandma Margaret and Grandpa Richard will ever say they're sorry? I sat down beside him at the kitchen table, choosing my words carefully. I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes when people make very big mistakes, it's hard for them to admit they were wrong. But don't they feel bad about lying to me? I think they feel terrible about a lot of things. But feeling bad and being able to say you're sorry are different things. James was quiet for a moment, processing this with the serious consideration he brought to everything now. I feel bad for them, he said finally. Why? Because they lost my dad, and then they lost me, and now they don't have anybody. The compassion in his voice broke my heart. Despite everything they'd done to him, despite the lies and manipulation, my 7-year-old son could still feel empathy for the people who'd hurt him. You have a very big heart, James. Just like your father did. Do you think Dad would be mad at them? I thought about David, about his gentle nature and his belief in forgiveness. I think your father would be sad that they chose fear over love. But I don't think he'd be mad. He'd want them to learn from their mistakes and do better. Do you think they will? Do better, I mean? I hope so. For their sake and for yours. The next morning brought news that would test that hope. Margaret Coaster had been released from the hospital and wanted to see James. Not for their scheduled supervised visit, but for what her lawyer called a conversation of critical importance. I almost said no. James was finally settling into a routine, finally starting to trust that I wasn't going anywhere, finally beginning to heal from 5 years of emotional manipulation. The last thing he needed was more drama from the Coasters. But something in the lawyer's tone made me reconsider. She says she has something to give him, the lawyer explained. Something that belonged to his father. What kind of something? She wouldn't say. But she was very insistent that it was important for James to have it. I talked it over with James, explaining that his grandmother wanted to see him outside their normal visit. Does she want to take me away again? He asked, and I could hear the fear in his voice. No, sweetheart. She can't take you away. I won't let that happen. But she says she has something that belonged to your father, something she wants to give you. What is it? I don't know. Do you want to find out? James thought about it for a long time. Will you come with me? If you want me to. I want you to. We met Margaret at a neutral location, a family counselor's office that specialized in high-conflict custody situations. Margaret looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past month. Her usually perfect hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. But when she saw James, her face lit up with genuine love and relief. Hello, sweetheart, she said softly. Hi, Grandma Margaret. James stayed close to my side, but his voice was warm. Despite everything, he still loved her. I have something for you, Margaret said, pulling a small wooden box from her purse. This belonged to your father when he was about your age. James looked at me for permission, then stepped forward to take the box. Inside was a collection of items that made my breath catch, David's childhood treasures, things I'd never seen before. A baseball card signed by his favorite player. A photo of him with his first dog. A letter he'd written to Santa when he was 6, asking for a baby brother and a treehouse. And at the bottom of the box, a small notebook filled with David's childhood handwriting. What is this? James asked, holding up the notebook. It's a journal your father kept when he was 7, Margaret said, her voice breaking. He wrote in it every day for a year. I thought you might like to read it. To know what he was thinking when he was your age. James opened the notebook to a random page and read aloud. Today I helped Mom plant flowers in the garden. She said someday when I have kids, I can teach them about flowers too. I hope I have a little boy who likes to dig in the dirt like me. The words hung in the air between us, David's voice reaching across time to touch his son. He wanted to teach me about flowers? James asked. He wanted to teach you about everything, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. He used to talk about all the things he'd show you when you got older. Baseball, sailing, how to build a treehouse. Why didn't you tell me that before? Margaret looked at me, then back at James, and for the first time since I'd known her, she told the complete truth. Because I was scared. When your father died, I felt like my whole world ended. And when you were born, you were the only piece of him I had left. I was so afraid of losing you too that I convinced myself keeping you away from your mother was protecting you. But it wasn't protecting me. It was hurting me. I know that now. I know I made terrible mistakes, and I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix them. But James, I need you to know that everything I did because I love you. I just loved you in the wrong way. James was quiet for a long time, holding his father's journal, processing words that were probably too mature for his age, but that he understood in his heart. I love you too, Grandma Margaret, he said finally. But I can't trust you anymore. The simple honesty of it broke something in Margaret's face. She sobbed openly, the careful composure she'd maintained for decades finally crumbling completely. I know, she whispered. I know, and I'm so sorry. Maybe someday I can trust you again. James continued with the wisdom of a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast. But you have to stop lying. To me, to Mom, to yourself. Margaret nodded, unable to speak. And you have to let me love my mom without making me feel bad about it. I will. I promise. Do you promise to tell me the truth about my dad? The real truth, not just the parts you want me to know. Yes. And do you promise to say you're sorry to my mom for all the mean things you did to her? Margaret looked at me for the first time since we'd entered the room. Her face was ravaged with grief and shame, but there was something else there too, a kind of relief, as if she'd been carrying a weight for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Jennifer, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. For the lies, for the theft, for keeping you from your son. For making you think you weren't good enough, weren't important enough, weren't worthy of love. The apology I'd dreamed of hearing for 5 years, and now that it was here, I felt no triumph, no vindication. Just sadness for all the time we'd lost, all the pain that could have been avoided. I forgive you, Margaret, I said, and meant it. Not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to anger won't help James heal. Thank you, she whispered. James stepped forward and hugged his grandmother, this woman who'd loved him and damaged him in equal measure. I forgive you too, Grandma. But things have to be different now. They will be, Margaret promised. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. As we left the counselor's office that day, James clutching his father's journal, I realized that this was what real victory looked like. Not the destruction of my enemies, not the reclaiming of stolen wealth, but the healing of a broken family. The Coasters would face the legal consequences of their actions. Richard would likely go to prison, their business empire would crumble, their social standing would never recover. But Margaret had taken the first step toward redemption by telling the truth and accepting responsibility. And James, my beautiful, resilient son, had shown them all what real strength looked like. The courage to forgive without forgetting, to love without enabling, to move forward without leaving the past unexamined. That night, as I tucked him into bed in our new home, James asked me to read from his father's journal. Today I told Mom I want to marry someone just like her when I grow up, I read. Someone who's kind and smart and makes me laugh. Someone who will love our kids as much as she loves me. Did Dad find someone like that? James asked. Yes, sweetheart. He found me. And together, we made you. Do you think he's happy that we're together again? I thought about David, about the man who'd believed in love and family and second chances. I think he's very happy. And I think he's proud of how brave and wise you've been through all of this. I miss him. I miss him too. But James, he's still with us. In your eyes, in your smile, in the way you care about other people even when they've hurt you. Your father's love is the best part of both of us. As James drifted off to sleep, I sat by his window looking out at the city lights, thinking about the journey that had brought us here. 5 years ago, I'd been a broken woman with nothing but grief and determination. Now I was a mother again, with my son safe in his bed and a future full of possibilities. The money would help. $12 million could fund a lot of good work, could help a lot of children who needed advocates and support. But the real treasure was sleeping peacefully down the hall, dreaming of the father he was finally free to remember and the mother who'd never stopped fighting to come home to him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Coasters' legal troubles were far from over, and James would need time and therapy to fully heal from 5 years of manipulation. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, we were a family again. And that was worth more than all the money in the world. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the David Martinez Children's Advocacy Center, watching James cut the ribbon at our grand opening. The building was beautiful, modern but warm, designed to feel safe and welcoming to children who'd experienced trauma or loss. "This center is named after my dad," James said into the microphone, his voice clear and confident. "He died when I was little, but my mom says he always wanted to help kids who needed someone to fight for them. So now we're doing that together." The crowd applauded, and I felt David's presence so strongly it took my breath away. This was what we dreamed of during those quiet evenings when James was a baby and the future seemed full of infinite possibilities. The center was already helping dozens of children, kids in foster care, children caught in custody battles, young people aging out of the system who needed support and advocacy. We had lawyers, social workers, therapists, and volunteers, all working together to make sure no child fell through the cracks the way James almost had. "Mom, look." James ran over to me, pointing at a wall display featuring photos of the children we'd helped. "There's Sandra. She got to stay with her aunt instead of going to foster care." Sandra was our first success story, a 9-year-old whose parents had died in a car accident, leaving her in the care of relatives who were fighting over custody and inheritance. We'd helped navigate the legal system, ensured her voice was heard, and made sure she ended up with the family member who truly had her best interests at heart. "She looks happy," I said, studying the photo of Sandra with her aunt at a school play. "She is happy. She told me yesterday that she's not scared anymore." That was the goal, helping children move from fear to safety, from confusion to clarity, from feeling powerless to knowing they had advocates who would fight for them. The center had also become a place of healing for our own family. James came here after school most days, doing his homework in my office or helping with age-appropriate volunteer tasks. He'd started a pen pal program with other children who'd lost parents, sharing his story and listening to theirs. The relationship with the Coasters had slowly, carefully begun to heal. Richard was serving a 3-year sentence for fraud, but he'd been writing letters to James, honest letters that acknowledged his mistakes and expressed genuine remorse. Patricia had started volunteering at a different children's charity, trying to make amends for her family's actions. Margaret visited James once a month now, supervised visits that focused on sharing memories of David and slowly rebuilding trust. She'd started therapy, was taking medication for her anxiety, and was learning to love James without trying to control him. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect. But it was honest, and that was enough. "Mom, can we go get ice cream to celebrate?" James asked as we locked up the center for the day. "Absolutely. What flavor are you thinking?" "Chocolate chip cookie dough. Dad's favorite." "How do you know that was his favorite?" "Grandma Margaret told me. She said he used to sneak extra scoops when Grandpa Richard wasn't looking." We walked to the ice cream shop hand in hand, my son chattering about his day, about the children he'd met, about the puzzle he'd helped Emma complete. He was 8 now, taller and more confident, but still the sweet, thoughtful boy who'd chosen forgiveness over anger. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think we'll help enough kids?" Will there always be more kids who need help than we can help?" It was a profound question from someone so young, the kind of question that showed he was already thinking about the scope of the work we'd chosen. "There will probably always be children who need advocates," I said carefully. "But James, every child we help goes on to help other people. Every family we keep safe raises children who know what love and safety feel like." The help keeps spreading like ripples in a pond. So even if we can't help everyone, the people we do help will help other people? Exactly. That's good. That means Dad's love keeps growing even though he's not here anymore. That's exactly what it means. As we sat in the ice cream shop, James working on his chocolate chip cookie dough while I enjoyed my strawberry cone, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. 5 years of separation, months of legal battles, weeks of healing and rebuilding trust. But also, a grandmother learning to love without controlling, a mother reclaiming her right to parent, a child discovering his own strength and compassion. Mom, I have an idea for the center, James said, looking up from his ice cream with David's serious expression. What's your idea? What if we made a special program for kids whose parents are in jail? Like, kids who love their parents, but their parents made bad choices. I thought about Richard, about the letters he wrote to James from prison, about the complicated feelings James had about loving someone who'd hurt him. That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. What made you think of it? Well, I love Grandpa Richard, but he did bad things. And I bet there are other kids who feel confused about that too. Maybe we could help them understand that you can love someone and still know they made mistakes. You're absolutely right. That's exactly the kind of program we should have. And maybe we could help the parents too? Like, help them learn how to be better when they get out of jail. My 8-year-old son was designing rehabilitation programs. The thought filled me with pride and amazement. James, you have your father's heart. He always saw the best in people, even when they'd made terrible choices. Do you think he'd be proud of us? I know he would be. I think he'd be amazed by how wise and kind you've become. And how strong you became. Grandma Margaret told me you used to be scared of everything, but then you became brave enough to fight for me. I was never scared of everything, I protested, laughing. Just most things. But you did it anyway. That's what brave means, right? Being scared, but doing the right thing anyway. That's exactly what brave means. We finished our ice cream and walked home through the city streets, past the building where the coaster offices used to be, past the hotel where I'd hidden as a fugitive, past the courthouse where we'd finally told the truth. All of it felt like ancient history now, like a story that had happened to different people. The woman who'd been thrown out with garbage bags and the boy who'd been told his mother didn't want him, those people had been real. But they'd been transformed by love and truth and the simple act of refusing to give up. Mom, do you ever wish things had been different? Like, that Dad hadn't died, or that the coasters had been nice to you from the beginning. I thought about it seriously. I wish your father was still alive, because I loved him and because you deserve to know him. But everything else? All the hard parts, all the fighting, all the time we were apart. Yeah. I think it made us stronger. I think it taught us things we needed to know about love and forgiveness and standing up for what's right. If everything had been easy, we might not have learned how to help other people. So the bad things turned into good things? The bad things taught us how to make good things. There's a difference. I think I understand. As we reached our apartment building, I saw a familiar figure waiting by the entrance. James Webb, my business partner and the man who'd helped me build both my fortune and my courage, was holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing the kind of smile that meant he had news. James, my son called out, running to hug the man who'd become like an uncle to him. What are you doing here? I came to congratulate you both on the center opening, and to ask your mom a very important question. He turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. Jennifer, we've been partners in business for 3 years now. We've built something amazing together, helped dozens of families, created a legacy that honors David's memory. Yes, we have. But I was wondering if you might be interested in a different kind of partnership. He pulled out a small velvet box, and my heart stopped. James Webb, what are you doing? I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not because you need rescuing, not because James needs a father figure, but because I love you both and I want to spend the rest of my life building good things with you. I looked at my son, who was grinning like he'd been in on this plan all along. Did you know about this? I asked him. He asked my permission last week. I said yes, but only if he promised to help us with the center and to always remember that Dad was my first dad. And what did he say? He said he'd be honored to be my second dad and that he'd make sure I always knew how much my first dad loved me. I looked at James Webb, this man who'd helped me find my strength, who'd stood by me through legal battles and media storms, who'd never tried to replace David, but had simply added his own love to our family. Yes, I said. Yes, I'll marry you. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, as my son cheered and passers-by stopped to congratulate us, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. From the depths of betrayal and loss to this new beginning, this expansion of love and family and possibility. So when's the wedding? James asked. We haven't even talked about that yet, I laughed. Can we have it at the center? And can all the kids we've helped come? If that's what you want, James Webb said, then that's what we'll do. And can Grandma Margaret come? I think she'd like to see Mom happy. I thought about Margaret, about the broken woman who'd slowly learned to love without controlling, who'd found her own path to redemption through honesty and therapy and the hard work of change. Yes, she can come. This family has room for everyone who chooses love over fear. As we walked up to our apartment, the three of us together, I realized that this was what victory really looked like. Not the destruction of enemies or the accumulation of wealth, but the building of something beautiful from the ashes of something broken. The Coasters had tried to erase me, to steal my son, to rewrite our history. But in the end, their betrayal had led me to discover strength I didn't know I had, love I didn't know was possible, and a purpose that would outlast all of us. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new children who needed advocates, new families who needed healing. But tonight, we were home. We were together. We were safe. And we were just getting started. Hey everyone, I said, looking directly at you, wherever you are, whatever brought you to this story. Thank you for taking this journey with us. If you enjoyed hearing about how we turned betrayal into purpose, how we chose forgiveness over revenge, how we built something beautiful from something broken, please hit that like button and subscribe. And if you're going through your own difficult situation right now, if someone has betrayed your trust or stolen your dreams or made you feel like you don't matter, I want you to know something. Your story isn't over. The people who hurt you don't get to write your ending. You do. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundation for the best things we build. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us end up teaching us exactly how strong we really are. Your comeback story is waiting to be written, and I can't wait to hear it. Until next time, remember that love always wins in the end. It just sometimes takes longer than we expect and looks different than we planned. But it always, always wins.